Get out! Old man Bennett is dead, and so is your free ride. That was Vanessa, my daughter-in-law, throwing my leather suitcases into the mud just 2 hours after my only son was lowered into the ground. She stood on the porch of the house I paid for, sipping expensive wine and laughing as the rain soaked my clothes. She told me I would die in a state-run nursing home, penniless and forgotten. She thought she had won the game. She thought the house, the cars, and the life insurance were hers. But she forgot one small detail. She forgot that before I was a grieving father, I was a structural engineer who built the bridges this city drives on. I know how to find cracks in concrete, and I definitely know how to bring a structure down. When the lawyer read the final clause of Bennett's will, the one she never knew existed, she did not just scream, she fainted cold, because the house she kicked me out of was never hers to begin with. Before I tell you how I dismantled her life piece by piece, please tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand your ground against someone who underestimated you. The rain at Oakwood Cemetery in Chicago felt less like water and more like ice shards against my neck. It was a gray, relentless Tuesday, the kind of weather that seeps into your bones and reminds you that you are 70 years old. I stood 6 feet away from the open grave, my hands clasped in front of me to hide the tremor. It wasn't Parkinson's, it was rage. My son Bennett was inside that mahogany box. He was 40 years old, a marathon runner, a man who ate kale and went to the gym 5 days a week. The coroner said it was a massive stroke, but looking at the dirt pile next to the hole, I could not process the logic. I stepped forward to grab a handful of wet earth to throw onto the casket, a final gesture, a father's goodbye. A hand with perfectly manicured red nails shot out and gripped my wrist. It was Vanessa. She was wearing a black dress that cost more than my first car and big dark sunglasses that did not hide the fact that her eyes were perfectly dry. "Stop the theatrics, Garrison!" She hissed, her voice low enough that the priest could not hear, but sharp enough to cut me. "Bennett is gone. You do not need to pretend you are the grieving patriarch anymore. You are expired goods." I looked at her. Really looked at her. For 10 years I had treated this woman like a daughter. When Bennett's startup needed capital, I sold my auto repair shop, the one I built from the ground up, to give him $200,000. I moved into their guest suite to help with the bills when things got tight. I fixed the plumbing. I mowed the acre of lawn. I picked up my grandson Leo from school every single day. "Vanessa, release my arm," I said, my voice gravelly. She shoved my hand away, wiping her palm on her dress, as if I were contagious. "Just get it over with. I have a reservation at the Drake for the reception, and I am not missing it because you want to have a moment." I looked past her shoulder. Standing behind a large oak tree about 20 yards away was a man. He was tall, wearing a charcoal suit that fit too well, and he was watching us. Not watching the funeral, watching Vanessa. I saw her subtle nod to him. A signal. My engineer's brain cataloged the data point immediately. Who brings a secret date to a husband's funeral? I dropped the dirt. It hit the wood with a hollow thud that echoed in my chest. "Goodbye, son," I whispered. "I failed you. I didn't see the snake in your bed until it was too late." Vanessa turned on her heel and marched toward the waiting limousine without waiting for me. I was left standing in the mud. The other mourners, mostly business associates of Bennett, and a few of my old friends from the construction days, gave me pitying looks. I waved them off. I walked to my own car, a 10-year-old Ford sedan that I kept running with my own tools, and followed the procession. I did not go to the reception. I could not stomach watching Vanessa drink champagne while my son's body was still cold. I drove straight to the house in Naperville. It was a sprawling brick colonial estate, the kind of house that screamed success. I had designed the structural reinforcements for the basement myself years ago to turn it into a high-tech server room for Bennett's company. I knew every beam, every joist, every wire in that house. I pulled into the driveway and killed the engine. The silence was heavy. I just wanted to go to my room in the East Wing, take a hot shower, and sleep for a week. I walked up the stone path, my keys in my hand. I slid the key into the lock. It didn't turn. I frowned, thinking I used the wrong one. I tried again. Jiggled it. Nothing. I checked the key. It was the same key I had used yesterday. I rang the doorbell, thinking maybe the electronic lock had engaged. No answer. Then I saw them. My 2 leather suitcases, the ones I had bought for my honeymoon with my late wife 45 years ago, were sitting in the middle of the front lawn. They were soaking wet. Beside them were 3 cardboard boxes with my books and my tools thrown in haphazardly. The front door opened. Vanessa stepped out. She had already changed out of her funeral clothes. She was wearing a white silk robe and holding a glass of dark red wine. She looked like the lady of the manor surveying a peasant. Vanessa. Why are the locks changed? I asked, standing in the rain. Because you do not live here anymore. Garrison, she said, taking a sip of wine. I stared at her. This is my home. I live in the East Wing. Bennett and I had an agreement. Bennett is dead. She interrupted, her voice flat and cold. The agreement died with him. The deed to this house has 2 names on it. Bennett Ford and Vanessa Ford. With him gone, I am the sole owner. You are just a guest who has overstayed his welcome. You cannot do this, I said, my voice rising. I have nowhere to go. My pension check does not come for another week. Not my problem, she replied. She reached into the pocket of her robe and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. She balled it up and threw it at me. It landed in a puddle at my feet. I bent down and picked it up. The water made the ink run, but I could still read it. It was an application for the Shady Pines nursing home. I knew the place. It was a state-funded facility 3 towns over, known for bedbugs and neglect. She had already filled out my name and social security number. I did you a favor, she said, leaning against the doorframe. I called them. They have a bed in the indigent ward. The shuttle bus comes by the gas station down the road at 6. If you hurry, you might make it. You are kicking me out on the day of my son's funeral. I asked, the reality finally piercing through the shock. I am clearing out the clutter, she corrected. I am young Garrison. I am wealthy. And I am finally free of your boring workaholic son. I plan to enjoy my life, and that does not include changing your diapers in 5 years. I straightened my spine. I am 70 years old, not an invalid. I built this city, Vanessa. I do not need anyone to change my diapers. Then prove it, she sneered. Get off my property. If you are not gone in 5 minutes, I am calling the police and telling them you are trespassing and threatening me. You know how the cops treat angry old men with no address. They lock them up for a mental health evaluation. Do you want to spend tonight in a padded cell or a motel? It is your choice. She stepped back and slammed the heavy oak door. The sound was final. I heard the deadbolt slide home. I stood there for a moment, the rain running down my face, mixing with the sweat of humiliation. I looked at the house. I looked at the window of the room where my grandson Leo slept. He wasn't there. She had sent him to a sleepover camp for the week so he wouldn't see the funeral, or so she said. Now I knew she sent him away so he wouldn't see her throw his grandfather into the street. I walked over to my suitcases. They were heavy with water. I dragged them to my car. I put the boxes in the back seat. My hands were shaking, not from cold, but from a precise cold fury that was beginning to ignite in my gut. I got into my Ford. I reached for my wallet and pulled out the credit card Bennett had given me for emergencies. It was a supplementary card linked to his main account. I needed a room. I needed food. I pulled up the banking app on my phone. Account closed. She had been fast. She must have called the bank the moment the death certificate was signed. I checked my own checking account. $212. That was it. I had transferred my savings. savings to Bennett 2 years ago to help him buy out a partner. He had promised to pay me back with interest after the next quarter. He never got the chance. $200, a tank of gas, a cheap room, a meal. I started the car and backed out of the driveway. I did not look back at the house. I drove toward the highway, my mind racing. Most men my age would have broken down. They would have driven to the nursing home, signed the papers, and accepted their fate. They would have sat in a wheelchair, staring at a wall, waiting to die. But I am not most men. I am a structural engineer. When a bridge has a defect, you do not paint over it. You strip it down to the foundation. You find the stress point, and you apply pressure until the whole thing comes down so you can build it right. Vanessa was the defect, and I was going to bring her down. I pulled into the parking lot of the Starlight Motel off Interstate 55. The neon sign buzzed with a dying flicker. The no in vacancy was burnt out. It was perfect. It was the kind of place where people went when they wanted to disappear or when they had nowhere else to exist. The lobby smelled of stale cigarette smoke and cheap lemon cleaner. The clerk was a kid with headphones around his neck who didn't even look up from his phone. $50 a night, he mumbled. Cash up front. No refunds. I counted out 3 $3 bills. 3 nights. I took the key to room 104. The room was small, with a carpet that had seen better decades and a bed that sagged in the middle. I sat on the edge of the mattress and listened to the trucks roaring by on the highway. I was wet, cold, and effectively homeless. I took out my wallet and laid everything on the nightstand. My driver's license, a picture of Leo, a picture of Bennett, and the crumpled nursing home application. I smoothed out the wet paper. Shady Pines. I looked at the signature line where she had forged my initials. She thought I was weak. She thought I was just an old mechanic who got lucky. She didn't know about the other life I lived before I bought the shop. She didn't know about the patents I held for industrial concrete reinforcement. She didn't know that I had a network of friends who weren't country club members but were guys who could find information that wasn't on Google. I picked up my phone. It was an old model, but it worked. I dialed a number I hadn't called in 5 years. Mitch, it's Garrison. There was a pause on the line, then a gruff voice answered. Garrison. I heard about Bennett. I am so sorry. I was going to come to the service, but I hate funerals. I know Mitch. I need a favor. Name it. I need you to run a background check on a guy. I don't have a name, but I have a description. Tall, charcoal suit, expensive haircut. He was at the funeral. And Mitch, I need you to find out who was the attending physician when Bennett died. There was a silence on the line, then the sound of a lighter clicking. You think it wasn't a stroke, don't you? I don't think anything yet, Mitch. But my daughter-in-law just kicked me out of my own house and canceled my cards 2 hours after the burial. She is moving too fast. People who are grieving don't move fast. People who are guilty do. I'll get on it, Garrison. Where are you? Starlight Motel, room 104. Jesus, Garrison. Stay put. I'll bring some bourbon and my laptop. I hung up. My stomach growled. I realized I hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. I walked to the vending machine outside. I put in $1 and bought a pack of peanut butter crackers. I ate them standing in the cold corridor, watching the rain turn the parking lot into a lake of oil and water. I closed my eyes and pictured the blueprints of my house in Naperville. I remembered the day I installed the hidden safe in the floor of the basement server room. Bennett had laughed and said, "Dad, who uses physical safes anymore, everything is in the cloud." I had told him, "The cloud can be hacked, son. Concrete cannot." Inside that safe was a document. A document Bennett and I had signed 3 years ago when his marriage started getting rocky. A document Vanessa knew nothing about. It wasn't the will. It was better. It was a lien. I had technically loaned Bennett the money for the house. We structured it as a private mortgage. According to the paperwork stored in that safe, if Bennett died, the loan was called in immediately. If it wasn't paid in full within 30 days, the property reverted to the lender. Me. But I couldn't just march in there and get it. She had changed the locks and likely the alarm codes. If I tried to break in, she would have me arrested, and a criminal record would ruin my credibility in probate court. I needed to get back into that house legally, or I needed to get her out. I went back into the room and dried my hair with the thin towel. I sat at the small desk and took out a notepad from my briefcase. I wrote down 3 names: Vanessa, the mystery man Drake, Leo. Leo was the leverage. Vanessa didn't care about the boy. I knew that. She treated him like an accessory, like a handbag. She pulled out for photos, but she knew I would die for him. That was why she blocked my number. She wanted to cut me off from the only thing I had left to break my spirit. My phone buzzed. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize. Leave town garrison. If you try to see Leo, I will file a restraining order. I will tell the judge you have dementia and are a danger to the child. Go to Shady Pines and die quietly. I stared at the screen. She wasn't just cruel. She was confident, overconfident. I typed back a single message: see you in court. I deleted the message immediately after sending it. No need to show my hand. Mitch arrived an hour later. He looked like a badger that had been dragged through a hedge backward. He was short-wide and wore a trench coat that had been out of style since the 80s. He carried a bottle of Jack Daniels and a military-grade laptop case. He didn't hug me. He just nodded. Poured 2 plastic cups half full of whiskey, and sat on the other chair. I found your mystery man, he said without preamble. He turned the laptop screen toward me. It was a photo from a society page. Vanessa was in it, holding a glass of champagne. Next to her was the man from the funeral. His name is Drake Thorne, Mitch said. Real estate developer. Or that's what he calls himself. Mostly he flips distressed properties. He's been sued 4 times for fraud. And get this, garrison. What? He's been Vanessa's personal trainer for 6 months. I took a drink of the whiskey. It burned, but it cleared my head. So she was cheating. For months, Mitch confirmed. And here is the kicker. 2 weeks before Bennett died, Drake filed for bankruptcy. He was broke, garrison. $7 million in debt. And now he's at my son's funeral, I said, connecting the beams in my head. Exactly. And guess who just updated her life insurance policy on her husband 3 months ago? I looked at Mitch. Vanessa. Double indemnity, Mitch said. $5 million if the death is accidental or sudden. A stroke at 40 counts as sudden. I stood up and paced the small room. $5 million. Plus the house. Plus the company assets. She walks away with nearly $10 million. And Drake gets his debts paid off, Mitch added. It's a motive, I said, but it's not proof. We need to know how Bennett died. Really died. The autopsy report was signed by a Dr. Aris Thorne, Mitch said, tapping a key. Thorne, I asked. Related to Drake, cousin, Mitch said. First cousin. My blood ran cold. The doctor who signed the death certificate was the cousin of the man sleeping with my son's wife. This wasn't just a tragedy. This was a conspiracy. We need to get into the house, I said. The evidence is there. Bennett had cameras. He installed them inside the house to watch the nanny years ago, but he never took them down. The server is in the basement. She changed the locks, Mitch said. And she has probably deleted the cloud backups. The local server backs up to a hard drive. In the floor safe, I said. It is an air-gapped system. I designed it. Unless she knows the combination to a safe she doesn't know exists. The footage from the night Bennett died is still sitting in the concrete floor of the basement. Mitch smiled. It was a scary expression. So we need to break into a fortress guarded by a black widow and her conman boyfriend. No, I said, finishing my whiskey. We don't break in. We get invited. How? By playing dead, I said. She thinks I am a weak old man who is going to crawl into a hole. We are going to let her think that. We are going to let her get comfortable. We are going to let her bring Drake into the house. And then when she feels safe, she will make a mistake. What kind of mistake? Mitch asked. She is greedy, I said. She threw out my books, but she kept my watch collection. She kept Bennett's vintage guitars. She is going to try to sell them. She needs cash fast to keep Drake happy before the insurance money clears. So Mitch asked. So I said, opening my briefcase and pulling out the blueprint of the house. We are going to be the buyers. I spent that night in the motel not sleeping but plotting. I wasn't Garrison Ford, the grieving father, anymore. I was Garrison Ford, the engineer. I was calculating loads and stress factors. Vanessa was a load-bearing wall in a corrupt structure. I just needed to place the dynamite in the right spot. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of pounding on my door. Police open up. I looked at the clock. 6 a.m. I got up and opened the door. 2 uniformed officers stood there. Behind them, standing by her Mercedes in the parking lot, was Vanessa. She was pointing at me. "That is him," she shouted. "That is the man who threatened to kill me and kidnap my son." The larger officer stepped forward, his hand on his taser. "Garrison Ford, put your hands behind your back. You are under arrest for domestic assault and terroristic threats." I looked at Vanessa. She smiled, a small, victorious smile. She had made the first move. She had anticipated my resistance and decided to crush me before I could even start. I turned around and let them cuff me. As the cold metal locked around my wrists, I didn't fight. I didn't scream. I just looked at the structural integrity of the motel walkway and calculated exactly how much weight it could hold before it collapsed. "You are making a mistake, officer," I said calmly. "Tell it to the judge," the cop said, shoving me toward the squad car. As I sat in the back of the cruiser watching Vanessa wave goodbye, I realized this wasn't going to be a simple demolition. This was going to be a war, and I had just lost the first battle. But wars are not won in the first skirmish. They are won by the side that is willing to endure the most pain. And I had nothing left to lose. They held me in the county lockup for 6 hours. It was a tactical delay designed to humiliate me more than anything else, since the charges were baseless and the threats were fabricated. When they finally released me with a warning to stay away from the residence in Naperville, I walked out into the afternoon sun with a singular clarity. They could take the house and they could freeze the accounts, but they could not erase the blood tie I had with my grandson. Leo was 10 years old. He was smart, too smart for his own good, and he was the only innocent party in this wreckage. I knew Vanessa. She would work fast to poison him against me. She would rewrite history, telling him his grandfather was sick, or dangerous, or simply didn't care. I needed to hear his voice. I needed to anchor him to the truth before she cut the line completely. I bought a cheap burner phone at a gas station and sat in my car, my thumb hovering over the keypad. I didn't call the house landline. Vanessa would have disconnected that by now. I called the secret number. For his birthday last year, I had given Leo a smartwatch with a cellular connection. It was our secret channel, a way for him to call me if he was scared during a thunderstorm, or if he just wanted to talk about Minecraft without his mother rolling her eyes. I prayed she hadn't found it. The line rang once, twice. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Hello?" It wasn't Leo. The voice was smooth, sharp, and dripping with venom. It was Vanessa. "Put him on Vanessa," I said, my voice low and steady. "Oh, Garrison," she laughed, a dry sound devoid of humor. "You really are a glutton for punishment. I found this little toy in his backpack this morning. Did you really think you could bypass me? I am his mother." "I am his grandfather," I countered. "I have a right to speak to him. He just lost his father. He needs stability, not isolation." He has stability, she snapped. He has me. And he has new people in his life who actually have resources. He does not need a homeless old man confusing him. We told him about your arrest, Garrison. We told him you had a mental break. He is scared of you. You are lying, I said, gripping the steering wheel so hard the leather creaked. Leo knows me. He knows I built the treehouse in the backyard. He knows I taught him how to fish. He knows what I tell him to know, she hissed. Listen to me closely, old man. If you call this number again, or if you try to contact him through his school or his friends, I will file harassment charges so fast your head will spin. I will paint you as a deranged stalker, and I will make sure you never get within 500 feet of this boy again. Do not test me. The line went dead. I stared at the cheap phone, fighting the urge to smash it against the dashboard. She had taken the watch. She was isolating him systematically, cutting off his lifelines. She said he was scared of me. That was the dagger. If Leo believed I had abandoned him, or worse, that I was dangerous, the damage would be irreversible. I checked the time. It was 2:30. School let out at 3. I didn't think. I didn't calculate the risk. I just drove. I knew Lincoln Elementary like the back of my hand. I had done the pickup run hundreds of times, waiting in the line of SUVs, listening to talk radio, watching Leo run out with his oversized backpack. I wasn't going to grab him. I wasn't going to cause a scene. I just needed him to see me. I needed him to see that I was standing tall, that I wasn't crazy, and that I hadn't left him. I parked my battered Ford a block away from the school entrance, ensuring I was on public property and not technically violating the distance of a restraining order that hadn't even been served yet. I stood by the hood of my car, arms crossed, waiting. The bell rang, and the flood of children poured out. The noise was a wave of chaotic energy. I scanned the faces, looking for that messy brown hair and the blue jacket he refused to zip up. Then I saw him. He was walking slowly, kicking a stone along the pavement, his head down. He looked small, too small. He looked like the weight of the world was sitting on his 10-year-old shoulders. He stopped near the pickup zone, looking around anxiously. Leo, I whispered under my breath. He looked up. It was as if he heard me. His eyes scanned the street, and then they locked onto mine. For a second time, stopped. I saw the confusion on his face, followed immediately by a flash of pure, unadulterated relief. He didn't look scared. He looked like a drowning sailor spotting a lighthouse. Grandpa, he shouted. He dropped his backpack and started to run toward me. He didn't care about the cars or the teachers. He just wanted to get to me. My heart soared. I took a step forward, ready to catch him, ready to tell him everything was going to be all right. But he never made it. A hand shot out from the crowd and grabbed Leo by the shoulder, jerking him back with unnecessary force. It wasn't a teacher. It was a man. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a suit that cost more than my annual pension. It was Drake, the man from the funeral. Leo stumbled, looking up in terror. Drake said something to him, sharp and commanding. I saw Leo shrink back, his spirit visibly collapsing. Drake didn't look at me. He looked through me as if I were part of the scenery, a piece of trash on the sidewalk. He kept a tight grip on Leo's arm, guiding him forcefully toward a sleek black BMW parked in the loading zone. Hey, I shouted, taking a step into the street. Get your hands off him. Drake ignored me. He opened the back door of the BMW and practically shoved Leo inside. Then he turned around. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking at the driver's side. The driver's door opened and Vanessa stepped out. She wasn't wearing morning clothes. She was wearing a bright red dress and heels. She looked radiant, victorious. She walked around the front of the car, and Drake met her there. Right there in front of the elementary school, in front of my grandson, who was watching from the back seat in front of the teachers and the other parents. Drake pulled my daughter-in-law close and kissed her. It wasn't a friendly peck. It was a claim. It was a public display of dominance and ownership. Vanessa melted into him, laughing softly as she pulled away. She glanced over Drake's shoulder and saw me standing by my car. She didn't look angry. She smiled. It was a cold, dead smile that said I won. They got into the car. The engine of the BMW purred a sound of expensive engineering, and they pulled away, leaving me standing in the exhaust fumes. I watched Leo's face in the rear window. He had his hand pressed against the glass. He wasn't crying. He was watching me, waiting for me to do something. And in that moment, standing on the cracked pavement, with my fists clenched at my sides, I realized something terrifying. This wasn't just about greed. This wasn't just about the house or the insurance money. This was an erasure. They were rewriting the narrative of my family, replacing my son and me with this stranger, this Drake character. They were stealing my grandson's future. I didn't chase the car. I didn't scream. I got back into my Ford and sat in the silence. My engineer's brain began to deconstruct the scene I had just witnessed. Drake was driving a new BMW, but Mitch had said he was bankrupt. Vanessa was kissing him in public 2 days after her husband died, which meant she felt untouchable. Overconfidence. That was a structural flaw. They thought I was broken. They thought the sight of them together with my grandson would crush me. But they were wrong. It didn't crush me. It focused me. I pulled out my notebook and wrote down the license plate number of the BMW. Then I wrote down the time and the location. I was done reacting. I was done being the victim. If they wanted to play dirty, I would show them what happens when you try to bury a man who knows how to dig. I started the engine. I had a meeting to get to, and for the first time in days, I knew exactly where I was going. The drive to Mitch's place was a blur of gray highway and grinding teeth. I wasn't going to a home or an office, I was going to a bunker. Mitch lived in a converted warehouse on the edge of the industrial district, a place where the city zoning laws were more like suggestions than rules. It was a fortress of solitude for a man who had spent 40 years seeing the worst of humanity. He was a retired private investigator, but that title didn't do him justice. He was a hunter who had traded his rifle for a keyboard and a high-speed fiber optic connection. We had fished together for 20 years, sitting in silence on Lake Michigan, waiting for something to bite. Today, I wasn't looking for perch. I was fishing for sharks. I parked my Ford behind a dumpster to keep it out of sight from the street. I didn't knock. I had a key, a heavy iron thing, that opened the reinforced steel side door. The air inside smelled of ozone, stale coffee, and cigarette smoke. It was dark, the only light coming from a bank of 6 monitors glowing blue against the far wall. Mitch was sitting there, a silhouette in a wheelchair, his back to me. He had lost the use of his legs in a car bomb incident back in '98, a souvenir from a case involving the mob. He didn't turn around when I entered. "You are out of jail," he said, his voice rough like sandpaper on concrete. "That took longer than I thought." "Vanessa likes to make a scene," I replied, closing the heavy door and locking it. I walked over to the desk, my footsteps echoing on the concrete floor. I didn't ask him how he was. I didn't ask about his health. We didn't have time for pleasantries. We were 2 old men running out of time and patience. I tossed the notebook onto the desk next to his keyboard. It landed with a heavy thud. "Drake Thorne," I said. "He drives a black BMW. I have the plate number, the time, and the location where he picked up my grandson. I want to know everything. I want to know where he sleeps, who he owes money to, and what size shoe he wears. And Mitch, I want to know how my son died." Mitch spun his chair around. His face was a roadmap of scars and wrinkles illuminated by the harsh monitor light. He looked at me with eyes that had seen everything and believed nothing. "The coroner's report says stroke Garrison," he said, tapping a printed document on his desk. "Massive cerebral hemorrhage. Natural causes. Case closed." I slammed my hand down on the metal desk. The monitors rattled. Bennett ran the Chicago Marathon last year in under 3 hours, I shouted, my voice bouncing off the metal walls. His resting heart rate was 45. He ate vegetables I can't even pronounce. He went to the doctor every 6 months for a full workup. Because he was terrified of leaving Leo alone. A 40-year-old man in peak physical condition does not just drop dead of a stroke without a warning sign. Systems do not fail without a stressor, Mitch. You know that. I know that. Mitch looked at me for a long moment, assessing my state. He saw the desperation, but he also saw the logic. He picked up the report and flipped through it. Dr. Eris Thorne signed off on it, he muttered. Same last name as your boy Drake. That is sloppy. Criminals used to have standards. It is not sloppy if they think no one is looking, I said, pacing the small space. They think I am a senile old man who is going to sign myself into a nursing home. They think the police are lazy. They are betting on apathy. But they forgot about me. Mitch turned back to the screens. His fingers flew across the keyboard, a rhythmic clatter that sounded like a machine gun. I am already running the plates on the BMW, he said. It is a lease, registered to a shell company in Delaware. Typical. But the company is linked to a P.O. box in the city that receives mail for 3 other businesses that have been flagged for fraud. Drake Thorne isn't a developer, Garrison. He is a parasite. He finds a host, he bleeds them dry, and he moves on. And Vanessa is the host, I said. Or the accomplice, Mitch corrected. Do not paint her as a victim yet. She let him pick up your grandson. She kissed him in public. She is in on it. I pulled a metal stool up to the desk and sat down. My knees cracked. I felt every year of my age, but my mind was sharp, a focused laser beam of intent. We need to see inside the house, I said. Mitch stopped typing. He looked at me over the rim of his glasses. She changed the locks, Garrison. And if she has Drake there, he has probably swept for bugs. If we try to plant something now, we will get caught. And breaking and entering will put you back in a cell for real this time. I don't need to plant anything, I said, leaning forward. The bugs are already there. Mitch frowned. What are you talking about? 10 years ago when Bennett bought that house, I oversaw the renovation, I said. I didn't just pick out the paint colors. I rewired the entire electrical grid. I reinforced the foundation. And I installed a closed-circuit security system. Bennett used the cloud cams, Mitch said dismissively. The ones you buy at the electronics store. She would have changed the passwords to those 10 minutes after he died. Those were the decoys, I said, allowing a small cold smile to touch my lips. Bennett was paranoid about corporate espionage. He was working on proprietary software. He asked me to build a backup system. Something that wasn't on the grid. Something that couldn't be hacked from the outside because it wasn't connected to the internet. So it is useless, Mitch said. If it is not on the internet, we can't access it from here. It wasn't connected to the internet, I corrected. It was connected to a dedicated hard line buried under the foundation running to the utility box on the street. It was an air-gapped closed loop recording to a server farm I built in a sub-basement room behind the wine cellar. A room Vanessa thinks is just a structural support pillar. Mitch's eyebrows went up. He looked at me with new respect. You built a panic room for data. I built a black box, I said. Just like on an airplane. It records audio and video from sensors hidden in the smoke detectors and the HVAC vents. It keeps a rolling 30-day loop. And how do we get into it from here? Mitch asked. If it is a hard line, we need to tap the physical wire. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small black USB drive. When I installed the system, I built a back door, I said. I installed a cellular transmitter in the utility box. It is dormant. It only wakes up if it receives a specific encrypted signal. It bridges the hard line to a cellular frequency for exactly 60 minutes. Enough time to download what we need. I handed him the drive. This has the handshake protocol and the encryption keys, I said. Wake it up, Mitch. I want to see what is happening in my house. Mitch took the drive. He didn't smile, but his eyes lit up. It was the look of a master craftsman being handed a new tool. He plugged it in. He brought up a terminal window, a black screen with green text. He started typing commands. The room fell silent except for the hum of the cooling fans and the click of the keys. I watched the screen, my breath held in my chest. This was the gamble. If Vanessa had found the room or if Drake had hired a professional sweeper who checked the utility box, we were dead in the water. Connecting to remote node. Mitch muttered. Handshake initiated. A progress bar appeared on the screen. It moved agonizingly slow. 10%. 20, come on, I whispered. If this works, Mitch said, his eyes glued to the screen, we are going to burn through a lot of data. The quality is going to be garbage until the buffer clears. I don't need 4K resolution, I said. I just need the truth. 50%. 70. Suddenly the screen flickered. The code vanished, replaced by a grid of 9 camera feeds. The image was grainy at first, pixelated and gray. Then it sharpened. My breath hitched. I was looking at my living room. It was strange seeing it from this angle high up near the ceiling vent. The furniture was the same, the leather sofa I had fallen asleep on, countless times the fireplace where we hung stockings at Christmas. But the atmosphere was wrong. There were boxes everywhere. Not moving boxes, selling boxes. My books were gone. Bennett's collection of vintage vinyl records was stacked by the door, ready to be shipped. I looked at the feed from the kitchen. Vanessa was there. She was wearing a silk blouse and drinking wine. She was laughing. She was leaning against the counter, and Drake was standing in front of her. He had his jacket off, his sleeves rolled up. He was eating an apple, taking big, arrogant bites. He looked comfortable. He looked like he owned the place. They are moving fast, Mitch said, pointing to another feed. This was the dining room. The table was covered in papers. Legal documents. Zoom in on that, I said, pointing to the pile. Mitch tapped a few keys. The image expanded. The resolution wasn't high enough to read the text, but I could see the letterheads. Real estate contracts, auction house estimates, and something else. A stack of brochures for luxury condos in Miami. She is liquidating, I said, my voice cold. She is selling everything. The house, the collections, the art. She is going to cash out and run. Look at the timestamp, Mitch said, pointing to the corner of the screen. I looked. It was live. I was watching them in real time. Now let's go back, Mitch said. You said it holds 30 days. Go to Tuesday night, I said. The night Bennett died. Mitch typed in the date. The screen went black for a second, buffering. Then it popped back up. It was 8:00 p.m. The living room was dark. Then the light snapped on. Bennett walked into the frame. Seeing him alive, walking, breathing, made my heart stop. He looked tired. He was wearing his running gear. He had just come back from a jog. He went to the kitchen and poured a glass of water. He looked healthy. He looked strong. Then Vanessa entered the frame. She wasn't wearing workout clothes. She was wearing a cocktail dress. She looked angry. She was shouting. There was no audio on this feed, yet Mitch was working on isolating the sound channel, but the body language was clear. It was an argument. A bad one. Bennett slammed his glass down on the counter. Water splashed everywhere. He pointed a finger at her. He was yelling back. He looked furious. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of paper. He waved it in her face. Vanessa froze. She stared at the paper. Then she lunged for it. Bennett pulled it back. He shouted something else. He turned around and started walking toward the stairs. Wait, Mitch said. Look at the timestamp. 8:14 p.m. Bennett was walking up the stairs. Vanessa was following him, screaming. They went out of frame of the kitchen camera. Switch to the landing camera, I ordered. Mitch switched feeds. We were now looking at the top of the stairs. Bennett appeared coming up. He was clutching the paper. He looked winded now. He was clutching his chest. Wait, I said. Rewind. Mitch skipped back 10 seconds. Bennett was clutching his chest before he hit the top step. He stopped. He leaned against the railing. He dropped the paper. It fluttered down the stairs. Vanessa appeared at the bottom of the frame. She saw him stop. She didn't run to help. She stopped. She watched. Bennett fell. It wasn't a push. It wasn't a blow. He just collapsed. He hit the floor of the landing hard. He didn't move. Vanessa stood there. She watched him for a full 10 seconds. Then she walked up the stairs slowly. She stepped over his body. She didn't check his pulse. She didn't call 911. She picked up the paper he had dropped. She looked at it. She folded it and put it in her pocket. Then she took out her phone. She didn't dial 3 digits. She dialed a number and held the phone to her ear. She spoke calmly. She waited. According to the police report, the 911 call came in at 8:45 p.m. Mitch said, his voice quiet. I looked at the timestamp on the screen. 8:16 p.m. She waited, I whispered. She waited almost 30 minutes. She let him die, Mitch said. It might have been a medical event, Garrison, but she let him die. That is negligent homicide at the very least. Depraved indifference. Zoom in on the paper, I said. The one she took. Mitch tried, but the angle was bad. We couldn't see what was on it. It doesn't matter, I said. I know what it was. Bennett found out. He found out about Drake or the money or the debts. That paper was the proof. That was why they fought. The stress triggered the event, and she let nature finish the job. I stared at the screen at the image of my son lying motionless on the floor, while his wife stepped over him like he was a piece of laundry. "Save it," I said. "Save everything." Mitch initiated the download. "We have the smoking gun," Mitch said. "We can go to the cops now." "No," I said, standing up. "The cops will arrest her for negligence, maybe. She will get a good lawyer. She will plead it down. She will say she panicked. She will say she thought he was faking. She will get 2 years probation, and she will still keep the money." "Then what do you want to do?" Mitch asked. "I want to destroy her," I said. "I want to take the money. I want to take the house. I want to take her freedom. And I want to take the one thing she values more than anything else." "What is that?" "Her reputation," I said. "She wants to be a socialite. She wants to be the grieving widow of the year. I am going to let her play the part. And then I am going to drop the curtain while the whole world is watching." I looked at the live feed again. Drake was kissing Vanessa in my kitchen. "Enjoy the apple, Drake," I whispered. "It is going to be your last meal in a free world." I turned to Mitch. "Can you get audio on the current feed?" Mitch nodded. "Give me a second." He tweaked the frequency. Static hissed, then voices cut through. "Lawyer says the old man is a non-issue," Drake was saying. "He has no standing. The house is yours." "And the will?" Vanessa asked. "Standard probate," Drake replied. "He leaves everything to you. We just have to wait out the creditor period. 6 months, and we are in the clear." I heard a noise on the feed, a doorbell. Vanessa looked at the camera monitor in the kitchen. "It's the appraiser," she said. "For the jewelry." "Perfect," Drake said. "Get cash. We need liquid assets to pay off the retainer for my bankruptcy lawyer." I looked at Mitch. "She is selling the jewelry," I said. "Bennett's grandmother's ring. My wife's pearls." "We can't stop her," Mitch said. "Not from here." "No," I said. "But we can buy them." I grabbed my coat. "Where are you going?" Mitch asked. "I am going to make a withdrawal," I said. "I have a friend who runs a pawn shop in the city. He owes me a favor. I need cash. A lot of it." "You are going to buy your own jewelry back?" Mitch asked. "No," I said, opening the door to the rainy night. "I am going to buy evidence. That jewelry is listed in the insurance rider. If she sells it for cash without reporting it to the estate, she is committing felony theft. I am going to catch her in the act." I walked out into the dark. The image of Bennett dying on the floor burned into my retinas. I wasn't cold anymore. I was burning up. They thought they had buried me, but they forgot that seeds grow in the dark, and I was about to become a forest of thorns. The silence in the warehouse was heavy enough to crush a man. The only sound was the hum of the cooling fans on Mitch's server rack and the rhythmic tapping of his fingers as he isolated the audio track. We were watching a ghost. On the grainy blue screen, my son Bennett was alive. He was angry. He was pacing the kitchen floor, his chest heaving with exertion and rage. But he was alive. Mitch tweaked a knob on the mixing board. The static hissed and popped like frying bacon, then suddenly voices cut through the white noise. It wasn't perfect. It sounded tinny and distant, like they were speaking from the bottom of a well, but the words were unmistakable. "You are a liar, Vanessa." Bennett's voice filled the room. It wasn't the calm, measured voice of the son I knew. It was a raw wound. I found the emails. I found the transfer receipts to the clinic. On the screen, Vanessa crossed her arms. Her body language was defensive, closed off. She said something back, but she was facing away from the microphone in the smoke detector, so it came out as a muffled mumble. Mitch adjusted the gain. "Don't lie to me," Bennett shouted over her. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. He slammed it onto the granite island. It was a DNA test. I knew it the moment I saw the letterhead. I watched my son's face contort in agony. It wasn't just anger. It was the look of a man who realizes his entire life is a fraud. "Leo isn't mine, is he?" Bennett screamed. 10 years, Vanessa. You let me raise him. You let me love him. You let me build a life around a lie. Who is he? Is he Drake's? Is that why you hired him? I felt like I had been punched in the gut. I gripped the edge of Mitch's metal desk so hard my knuckles turned white. Leo, my grandson. The boy I taught to fish. The boy who looked at me with Bennett's eyes. But they weren't Bennett's eyes. They were a stranger's eyes. The room spun. I had to remind myself to breathe. On the screen, Vanessa didn't deny it. She didn't cry. She didn't beg for forgiveness. She laughed. It was a sharp, cruel sound that cut through the audio distortion. "It took you long enough," she said, her voice clear now as she turned toward the camera. "You were always so busy with your stupid company, Bennett. You never noticed anything. You were a paycheck, a boring, safe paycheck. Drake was excitement. Drake was real." Bennett's face turned a dangerous shade of red. The veins in his neck bulged. I knew about his high blood pressure. I knew he was on medication. He shouldn't be shouting. He shouldn't be under this stress. "Get out," he roared, pointing at the door. "Get out of my house. I am calling my lawyer. I am cutting you off. You won't get a dime. I am going to take Leo, and you will never see him again." "You can't take him," Vanessa sneered. "He isn't yours, remember. You have no rights. You are just the man who paid the bills." Bennett lunged toward her, not to hit her, but to grab her phone, which was sitting on the counter. He wanted to make a call. Vanessa snatched it away. They grappled for a second. It wasn't a violent fight, just a desperate struggle for control. Bennett stumbled back. He looked winded. He brought a hand to his chest, rubbing his sternum. I leaned forward toward the screen, whispering to a dead man. "Sit down, Bennett. Just sit down. Breathe, son." He didn't sit. He didn't. He turned and walked toward the hallway. He was going to the landline in his office upstairs. He was determined. Vanessa followed him, screaming insults that I won't repeat. She was goading him, pushing him, trying to hurt him one last time. Bennett reached the landing of the stairs. He stopped. He grabbed the banister with his left hand. His right hand clutched his chest, again tighter this time. He swayed. I saw the moment the stroke hit. It wasn't like in the movies. There was no dramatic speech. His knees just buckled. His structural integrity failed. He tried to take a step, but his foot didn't lift. He pitched forward. He hit the stairs hard. His head cracked against the wooden riser with a sound that made Mitch flinch. He tumbled down 3 steps and landed in a heap on the landing floor. He tried to push himself up. His arm shook, then collapsed. He rolled onto his back, staring up at the ceiling, staring up at Vanessa. Vanessa stood at the top of the stairs. She looked down at him. She didn't scream. She didn't run to him. She stood there perfectly still, watching him twitch. "Help," Bennett wheezed. The audio picked it up clearly. It was a wet, gurgling sound. "Help." Vanessa took a step down. She leaned over the railing. She looked at him with the curiosity of a child watching a bug writhe on a pin. "If I help you," she said, her voice calm, chillingly conversational, "you are going to divorce me, aren't you? You are going to ruin me." Bennett's eyes were wide. He was paralyzed. He couldn't speak anymore. He just looked at her, pleading. Vanessa straightened up. She took out her phone. "Call 911. I shouted at the screen, knowing it was useless, knowing I was watching a recording from 3 days ago. "Call the damn ambulance." She didn't call 911. She unlocked her phone and dialed a number. She put it to her ear. "Drake," she said. "It happened." There was a pause. "Yes, just like we talked about. He got upset. He fell. No, I didn't push him. His heart gave out." He is on the floor. He is still moving. She listened for a moment, nodding. Okay, I will wait. How long? 20 minutes. Okay. I love you too. She hung up. I stared at the screen in horror. My brain refused to accept the data. This wasn't negligence. This wasn't panic. This was execution by clock. She was letting him die. She was timing it out, ensuring the brain damage was irreversible, ensuring he couldn't speak, couldn't testify, couldn't change the will. Mitch pointed to the time code on the screen. 8 to 17 p.m. Bennett was still moving. His hand twitched. His chest rose and fell in shallow, ragged gasps. Vanessa walked past him. She literally stepped over his legs to get to the kitchen. She poured herself a glass of water. She drank it slowly. She checked her makeup in the hallway mirror. She smoothed her dress. She sat on the bottom step just 5 feet away from my dying son and started scrolling through her phone. I saw the blue light reflecting on her face. She was checking Instagram. I watched 10 minutes pass, then 15. At minute 18, Bennett's hand stopped moving. His chest stopped heaving. He went still. Vanessa looked up from her phone. She looked at him. She stood up and nudged his foot with her toe. No reaction. She checked her watch. 25 minutes had passed. She took a deep breath. She messed up her hair. She unzipped her dress slightly to look disheveled. She splashed some water on her face to mimic tears. Then she dialed 911. "Oh my God, please help me," she screamed into the phone, her voice transforming instantly into a hysterical shriek. "My husband collapsed. He isn't breathing. Please hurry, I think he is dead." I turned away from the screen. I felt sick. A deep, violent nausea roiled in my stomach. I walked to the corner of the warehouse and dry heaved into a trash can. My son didn't die of natural causes. He died because his wife watched the clock while his brain starved of oxygen. Mitch paused the video. The room was silent again. "That is depraved indifference," Mitch said, his voice low. "In this state, if you have a duty of care, like a spouse does, and you willfully withhold aid to cause death, that is murder. Second degree may be first, if a prosecutor has guts." I wiped my mouth and stood up. I felt cold. Colder than I had ever felt in my life. The grief was gone, burned away by a white-hot hatred that clarified everything. "Leo isn't my grandson," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. Mitch looked at me with sympathy. "Garrison, the DNA test was on the counter. We didn't see the results, but Bennett's reaction—" "I know," I said. "He isn't my blood. Drake is his father. That is why Drake was at the school. That is why he grabbed him. He wasn't kidnapping a stranger. He was claiming his property." I walked back to the desk and looked at the frozen image of Vanessa's face. "Does it matter?" Mitch asked. I thought about the boy, the 10-year-old, who liked building Lego sets and eating mint chocolate chip ice cream. The boy who called me grandpa. The boy who ran to me in the parking lot. Did biology matter? Did chromosomes define the hours I spent teaching him to ride a bike, or the nights I read to him when he had the flu? "No," I said. "It doesn't matter. He is Bennett's son. He is the son Bennett raised, and he is the only thing left of him. Vanessa and Drake are going to use him. They are going to use him to get the trust fund Bennett set up. They are going to ruin him." I looked at Mitch. "We have the video. We have the proof. We can go to the police," Mitch said. "This puts her away for 20 years. Maybe more." "And the money?" I asked. "The estate freezes," Mitch said. "It goes into probate hell. The lawyers eat up half of it. Leo goes into foster care until paternity is established. It is a mess, Garrison." I shook my head. "No. If we arrest her now, she plays the victim. She says she panicked. She says she was in shock. She gets a good lawyer, and she pleads down, and Drake walks away. He wasn't in the house. He can claim he didn't know. He walks away, and he takes Leo. Then what is the plan? Mitch asked. I looked at the blueprint of the house again. I looked at the structural pillars I had drawn years ago. We destroy them, I said, completely. We don't just put them in jail. We take away everything they did this for. We take the money. We take the house. We take their future. How? The reading of the will is on Friday, I said. I saw the email on Bennett's computer in the video feed. Lawrence Stratford is the executor. Lawrence Mitch whistled. He is the most expensive shark in Chicago. He is also my friend, I said. We served in the Corps together 50 years ago. He wrote Bennett's will, but he also wrote a codicil, a secret amendment that Bennett signed 3 days ago. Wait, Mitch said. You said Bennett found out about the DNA test that night. He found the paper that night, I corrected. But he suspected before. He came to me last week. He asked me how to protect the assets if he divorced her. I sent him to Lawrence. He signed a document that changes everything. Vanessa doesn't know about it. Drake doesn't know about it. They think they are walking into a payday. I looked at the screen one last time at my son's body. I am going to let them walk into that room, I said. I am going to let them think they won. I am going to let them gloat. And then I am going to drop the hammer. But first I need to secure the assets. I need to make sure that when the dust settles, there is something left for the boy. What do you need me to do? Mitch asked. I pointed to the screen. Drake is a gambler, I said. He owes money. Big money. That is why he is desperate. Find out who holds his marker. Find out who he is afraid of. The Russian mob, Mitch guessed. Or the Albanians. Find them, I said, and tell them Drake Thorne is coming into a windfall on Friday. Tell them he is planning to skip town. Mitch smiled. A cruel, jagged smile. You want to sick the wolves on him. I want to distract him, I said. I want him looking over his shoulder while I dismantle his girlfriend. And Vanessa? Mitch asked. I pulled out my phone. I had one more card to play. Vanessa cares about one thing, I said. Her image. She wants to be the queen of Naperville. She wants the country club membership and the charity galas. So I said I am going to ruin her party. I am going to buy every single item she put up for auction. The watches, the guitars, the art. With what money, Garrison? You have $200. I looked at him. I have a patent portfolio worth $10 million that I haven't touched in 20 years because I wanted a simple life. I am going to leverage it. By tomorrow morning, I will have a line of credit that could buy this whole city block. I stood up and buttoned my coat. She called me a penniless old man. She is about to find out that I can buy and sell her soul before breakfast. I walked to the door. Where are you going? Mitch asked. To buy a suit, I said. If I am going to a funeral on Friday, I need to dress for the occasion. And this time I am not going to be the one crying. The flashing lights of the police cruisers cut through the thin curtains of room 104, painting the walls in strobing bursts of red and blue. It was 3 in the morning when the door didn't just knock, it exploded inward. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, still in my clothes, analyzing the blueprints of the house, but I didn't even have time to stand up before 3 officers were in the room. They weren't the local beat cops this time. These were county deputies, and they looked like they were expecting a shootout. Garrison Ford, show us your hands, one of them shouted, leveling a taser at my chest. I raised my hands slowly, palms open. I am unarmed, I said, my voice calm despite the adrenaline dumping into my system. They grabbed me. They didn't ask questions. They spun me around and slammed my face against the cheap drywall. I felt my shoulder pop, the same shoulder I had injured building the suspension bridge in '92. The pain was sharp and white-hot. They cuffed me tight, tighter than necessary, and dragged me out into the humid night air. The parking lot was full of spectators. Truckers in their underwear, tourists clutching their robes. But front and center, standing next to a silver sedan that belonged to her lawyer, was Vanessa. She was wearing a trench coat, clutching a handkerchief to her face, crying. It was a performance worthy of an Oscar. He said he was going to take him, she wailed loud enough for the growing crowd to hear. He said he was going to take my son and disappear. He is unstable, officer. He has been stalking us all day. I locked eyes with her as they shoved me toward the cruiser. She lowered the handkerchief just an inch. Her eyes weren't wet. They were gleaming. She mouthed 2 words to me. Checkmate. You are under arrest for aggravated stalking and making terroristic threats against a minor, the deputy said, pushing my head down to clear the doorframe. We have a signed affidavit from the mother and witness testimony placing you at the school attempting to forcibly remove the child. I didn't argue. I didn't scream that I was just trying to say hello to my grandson. Arguments don't work in the back of a police car. Evidence does. And right now, the evidence of her lies was locked in a safe she didn't know existed while I was being hauled to county jail. The holding cell was a concrete box that smelled of industrial disinfectant and unwashed bodies. There were no windows, just a steel toilet and a bench bolted to the wall. I sat there for hours. My watch had been taken during processing, so I tracked time by the shift changes of the guards and the rhythmic dripping of a pipe somewhere in the walls. I was 70 years old. I was a man who had built skyscrapers. I was a man who had employed hundreds of people. And now I was inmate number 49201, wearing an orange jumpsuit that was 2 sizes too big, shivering on a cold bench while the woman who killed my son slept in my bed. It is easy to lose your mind in a place like that. It is easy to let the despair creep in and rot you from the inside out. But I didn't let it. Instead, I built a mental model of my revenge. I calculated the load-bearing capacity of Vanessa's lies. I visualized the demolition sequence. Every hour I sat there was another charge of dynamite I was placing at her foundation. Sometime the next afternoon, the heavy steel door buzzed and clanked open. Ford. You have a visitor, the guard grunted, not looking up from his clipboard. Lawyer. I stood up, my joints stiff, my shoulder aching. I expected a public defender, some overworked kid fresh out of law school, who would tell me to plead guilty to avoid a trial. I was led into a small interview room with a scratched plexiglass divider. On the other side, sitting with the posture of a king on a throne, was not a public defender. It was Lawrence P. Stratford. He was wearing a 3-piece navy suit that probably cost more than the jail itself. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, and his gold cufflinks caught the harsh fluorescent light. Lawrence was 72, 2 years older than me. We had served in the Corps together 50 years ago. Since then, he had become the most feared estate attorney in Chicago. He was the kind of lawyer who didn't go to court because people settled the moment they saw his name on the letterhead. He looked at me, his blue eyes sharp and assessing. He didn't look pitying. He looked furious. You look like hell, Garrison, he said, his voice a smooth baritone that commanded attention. You should see the other guy, I rasped, sitting down. There is no other guy, Lawrence said, opening his leather briefcase. Just a greedy woman and a system she played like a fiddle. I heard about Bennett. I am sorry, old friend. I truly am. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Did you get my message? Mitch called me at 4 a.m, Lawrence said. He sent me the video file. I watched it, Garrison. I watched her let him die. His hands, which were shuffling papers, stopped. They were trembling slightly. Lawrence had known Bennett since he was a baby. He was his godfather. I am going to destroy her, Lawrence whispered. I am going to strip the flesh from her bones in a courtroom until there is nothing left but her greed. But first, we have to get you out of here. How, I asked. She has a restraining order. She has witnesses. She has a script, Lawrence corrected. I reviewed the affidavit. It is fiction. But right now it is a legal document signed by a judge. If we fight it today, we show our hand. We give her time to dig in. So what do? We play dead, Lawrence said, leaning closer to the glass. I have a deal on the table. The district attorney is a friend of mine. He is willing to drop the criminal charges if you agree to the restraining order. You have to stay away from her, Garrison. You have to stay away from the house, and you have to stay away from Leo. I can't leave Leo with those monsters, I said, slamming my hand against the table. You have to, Lawrence insisted, for 3 days, just until Friday. Why Friday? Because that is when I scheduled the reading of the will, Lawrence said. A small, cruel smile touched his lips. Vanessa has been calling my office every hour on the hour. She wants the money. She wants the title to the house. She thinks Bennett died without updating his estate plan. And did he? I asked, holding my breath. Lawrence pulled a document from his briefcase. It was a thick envelope sealed with red wax. Bennett came to see me 3 days before he died, Lawrence said. He was a mess, Garrison. He told me about the DNA test. He told me he was going to confront her. He was terrified she would take everything. He asked me to draft a codicil, an emergency amendment to his will. What does it say? Lawrence put a finger to his lips. Vanessa thinks she is inheriting an empire, he said. She thinks she gets the house, the investment accounts, and the company shares. She thinks she is going to be the Queen of Chicago. And what is she actually getting, I asked. Lawrence's eyes glinted with a cold, hard light. She is getting exactly what she deserves, Garrison. But the beauty of it is the house. She thinks Bennett owned the house. She thinks her name is on the deed because she bullied him into signing a quitclaim deed last year. I felt my heart stop. She bullied him, so she does own it. Lawrence shook his head. Bennett signed the deed, yes. But Bennett didn't own the land the house sits on. Do you remember the corporate restructuring we did 10 years ago when you loaned him the startup capital? I frowned, trying to remember. I signed a lot of papers. I trusted you and Bennett to handle the details. We put the land in a blind trust, Lawrence said. A trust controlled by the original investor. Me, I whispered. You, Lawrence confirmed. Bennett owned the bricks and the mortar, but you own the dirt, Garrison. And under Illinois law, the structure is secondary to the land. The moment Bennett died, the ground lease expired. That house is trespassing on your property. I sat back in the metal chair, my mind reeling. The house wasn't hers. It never was. So I can kick her out, I asked. You can do more than that, Lawrence said. You can evict her. You can sue her for back rent. You can bulldoze the place if you want to. But she doesn't know that. She thinks she won. So we let her think she won, I said, understanding the strategy. Exactly, Lawrence said. I am going to go to the judge now. I am going to tell him you are a grieving father who had a mental break. I am going to tell him you agree to the restraining order. You will stay in your motel. You will be quiet. You will look defeated. And on Friday, I asked. On Friday, Lawrence said, closing his briefcase with a snap that sounded like a gunshot you put on your best suit. You come to my office, and we are going to drop a nuclear bomb on her life. He stood up and adjusted his cuffs. One more thing, Garrison. Mitch told me about the jewelry, about your plan to buy it back. I nodded. I have the cash. Keep it, Lawrence said. I made a call to the auction house she is using. The owner owes me a favor from a tax evasion case I handled in the 90s. He is going to let her consign the items. He is going to let her think they are sold, but he is not going to sell them. He is going to hold them as evidence of theft from the estate. When we walk into that room on Friday, we won't just have a will. We will have a felony indictment waiting in the wings. I looked at my old friend. I had never been so happy to see a shark in a suit. Get me out of here, Lawrence, I said. I have a suit to buy. Sit tight, Lawrence said. You will be out in an hour. And Garrison, when you walk out of here, try to look broken. Give her the satisfaction. It will make the fall that much sweeter." He turned and walked out. I watched him go. I sat back on the bench, and for the first time in 2 days, I felt my shoulder relax. They had taken my son. They had taken my home. They had tried to take my dignity. But they had made a fatal error in their calculations. They assumed the foundation was weak just because the paint was peeling. I closed my eyes and waited for the sound of the key in the lock. The game was set. The pieces were moving, and checkmate was just 3 days away. The courthouse smelled of floor wax and misery. A scent I had not encountered since I had to sue a concrete supplier for faulty aggregate back in '85. I walked through the metal detectors, my belt in my hand, my shoes in a plastic bin, feeling every minute of my 70 years. But today, I wasn't trying to hide my age. I was weaponizing it. Lawrence had been very specific in his instructions before I left the holding cell. Do not stand up straight, Garrison. Do not look people in the eye. Shuffle. Let your hands shake. You need to look like a man whose foundation has cracked. You need to look like you are 5 minutes away from a stroke. I wore the same suit I had been arrested in. It was wrinkled, stained with jail coffee, and smelled of sweat. I hadn't shaved in 2 days. When I caught my reflection in the glass of the courtroom doors, I didn't recognize myself. I looked like a derelict. I looked beaten. Perfect. Vanessa was already inside, sitting at the plaintiff's table. She looked immaculate. She was wearing a cream-colored suit that screamed innocence and wealth. Her hair pulled back in a severe bun that highlighted her cheekbones. Drake was sitting in the gallery behind her legs, crossed, looking at his phone. He looked bored. He looked like a man who had already spent the money he hadn't stolen yet. When I walked in, Vanessa didn't look scared. She looked disgusted. She leaned over to her lawyer, a sharp-faced man named Cohen, who charged $600 an hour to ruin lives, and whispered something. They both laughed. It was a small, discreet sound, but in the quiet courtroom, it echoed like a gunshot. I sat down next to Lawrence. He was the only thing on my side of the room that looked expensive. He patted my arm, his touch gentle, but his eyes hard as flint. "Remember the objective," Lawrence murmured, his voice barely audible. "We need her to feel safe. We need her to think the war is over so she drops her guard. If we fight this restraining order, she will drag out the probate process for months, just to spite you. We need her to rush. We need her in my office on Friday." I nodded, letting my head hang low. "I understand." "All rise," the bailiff shouted. Judge Holloway entered. He was a no-nonsense man with a reputation for clearing his docket quickly. He looked at Vanessa, then he looked at me. I saw the judgment in his eyes. He saw a grieving widow and a disheveled, unstable old man. The narrative was already written. Mr. Cohen stood up, smoothing his tie. "Your Honor, we are here to request a permanent restraining order against Mr. Garrison Ford. As the affidavit states, Mr. Ford has exhibited erratic and violent behavior since the tragic death of his son. He has stalked my client, he has attempted to kidnap the minor child from school, and he has made verbal threats against my client's life. We believe he is suffering from a mental decline that makes him a danger to himself and others." Vanessa dabbed at her dry eyes with a tissue. "I just want to feel safe," she whispered loud enough for the microphone to catch. "I just want to mourn my husband without fear." The judge turned to Lawrence. "Mr. Stratford, how does your client plead to these allegations?" This was the moment. My instincts screamed at me to stand up, to roar that she was a liar and a murderer. But I forced my body to slump. I let my hands tremble on the table. "Your Honor," Lawrence said, his voice heavy with resignation. "My client is a grieving father. He just buried his only son. He admits that his emotions got the better of him. He was confused. He just wanted to see his grandson. So you are not contesting the order, the judge asked, surprised. Usually these hearings were a dogfight. Lawrence looked at me, then back at the judge. Mr. Ford is tired, Your Honor. He has no home. He has no access to his funds. He recognizes that his presence is causing distress to his daughter-in-law. We are willing to agree to the restraining order. We will agree to zero contact with the minor child, Leo Ford. I heard a gasp from the gallery. It was Mitch sitting in the back row wearing a baseball cap pulled low. He knew the plan, but hearing me give up Leo was still a physical blow. Vanessa straightened up in her chair. She looked surprised, then suspicious, then triumphant. However, Lawrence continued, raising a finger. My client is currently destitute. He was evicted from his home the day of the funeral. His accounts were frozen. If he agrees to stay away, he needs assurance that he will not starve. We are asking for a stipend from the estate, a small living allowance until probate is settled. Mr. Cohen laughed. Your Honor, the estate is not a charity. Mr. Ford has a pension. His pension is barely enough to cover his medication. Lawrence lied smoothly. We are asking for a show of good faith. If Mrs. Ford wants him to disappear, she needs to give him the means to survive elsewhere. Otherwise, he will have no choice but to remain in the jurisdiction, living in his car, likely violating the order inadvertently. The judge looked at Vanessa. It seems like a reasonable request, Mrs. Ford. If you want him gone, help him go. Vanessa leaned over to Cohen. They whispered. I saw her eyes flick to me. She was calculating. She was weighing the cost of getting rid of me against the pleasure of seeing me suffer. She smiled. It was the smile of a predator who realizes the prey has stopped running. She stood up, Your Honor. She said, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. I am a charitable woman. Bennett would have wanted his father to be taken care of, no matter how difficult he has become. I agree to a stipend. How much? Lawrence asked. $500 a month, Vanessa said. The courtroom was silent. $500. In this city, that wouldn't cover a week in a motel. It was an insult. It was a crumb thrown to a starving dog. Lawrence looked at me. I kept my head down, but I gave a nearly imperceptible nod. My client accepts, Lawrence said. The judge banged his gavel. So ordered. The restraining order is granted for a period of 1 year. Mr. Ford, you are to stay 500 yards away from Mrs. Ford and the child Leo Ford. In exchange, the estate will issue a monthly check of $500 to be picked up at Mr. Cohen's office. Adjourned. It was over. I had just legally signed away my right to protect my grandson. I had sold my dignity for $500. I stood up, leaning heavily on the table. Vanessa walked past me on her way out. She stopped. Drake was waiting for her at the gate, grinning like a shark. Vanessa leaned in close. She smelled of expensive perfume and victory. You made the right choice, Garrison, she whispered. I looked up at her, letting my eyes water, letting my lip tremble. I just want to go home, Vanessa. I just want this to be over. It is over, she said. You lost. But hey, look on the bright side. $500 is plenty if you know how to budget. It is enough to buy cat food. I hear it tastes just like tuna if you are hungry enough. She laughed. Drake chuckled and wrapped an arm around her waist. By the way, she added, we are moving up the reading of the will. I called Lawrence's office this morning. Since you are being so cooperative, we are doing it Friday at noon. I want to get the title transfer started so I can put the house on the market next week. Drake and I are looking at penthouses in the city. You should come see us sometime. Oh, wait. You can't. She patted my cheek, a condescending tap that made my skin crawl. Then she turned and walked out, her heels clicking on the marble floor, a rhythm of absolute arrogance. I watched them go. I watched the doors swing shut behind them. Lawrence began packing his briefcase. He didn't look at me until the room was empty. Did you hear that? Lawrence asked, his voice dropping the defeated tone. I heard it, I said, straightening my spine. My hands stopped shaking. My shoulders went back. The old man act evaporated. Friday at noon, Lawrence said. She took the bait. She is in a rush. She wants to sell the house next week. She is going to try to flip it, I said. She needs the cash to pay off Drake's debts before his kneecaps get broken. That is why she agreed to the stipend. She thinks $500 bought her speed. It bought her a funeral, Lawrence said. Yours is on Friday, Garrison. But hers starts the moment she walks into my office. I looked at the door where she had exited. The shame of the last hour burned in my gut, but it was a cold, clean burn. It was fuel. Cat food, I whispered. I turned to Lawrence. Do you have the papers ready? I asked. Everything, Lawrence said. The real deed, the corporate filings proving you own the construction firm, the trust documents for the land, and the affidavit from the pawnshop owner confirming she consigned the jewelry. Good, I said. I walked toward the exit. I didn't shuffle this time. I walked with the stride of a man who had built bridges across raging rivers. I walked with the weight of a sledgehammer in my hands. Where are you going? Lawrence asked. I am going back to the motel, I said. I have a suit to press, and I have a phone call to make to Mitch. If Vanessa wants to sell the house next week, I need to make sure the open house is memorable. I pushed open the courtroom doors. The sun was shining outside, but for Vanessa and Drake the storm was just beginning. They thought they had buried me. They didn't realize they had just poured the concrete for their own prison cell. And on Friday, I was going to lock the door. Thursday night at the Starlight Motel was quiet. The kind of quiet that usually precedes a tornado. I sat in the dark, the glow of Mitch's laptop illuminating my face, turning my skin a ghostly blue. I wasn't sleeping. I hadn't slept since the holding cell. My body was running on caffeine and a singular cold hatred that had replaced my blood. On the screen, the live feed from my house in Naperville was broadcasting a nightmare. It was a party. Vanessa hadn't waited for the ink to dry on the restraining order. She hadn't waited for the probate court to officially appoint her executor. She had thrown open the doors of my home, Bennett's home, and invited the wolves in. The living room was crowded, not with friends or family, but with strangers. Men in cheap suits who laughed too loud, women wearing dresses that looked like they belonged in a nightclub, not a suburban estate. The music was thumping a bass-heavy rhythm that vibrated the camera lens in the ceiling vent. They were drinking Bennett's wine collection. I watched a man I didn't recognize pop the cork on a 1996 vintage Bordeaux, a bottle Bennett had been saving for Leo's 21st birthday. The man took a swig straight from the bottle and laughed, spilling red droplets onto the Persian rug my late wife had picked out in Istanbul. And in the center of it all, holding court like a queen on her coronation day, was Vanessa. She was wearing a gold dress that shimmered under the chandelier lights. She had a glass of champagne in one hand and her phone in the other. Drake was by her side, his arm draped possessively over her shoulders. He had moved in. I could see his suitcases stacked in the hallway. He was wearing Bennett's smoking jacket, the silk one I had given him for Christmas 2 years ago. Seeing that sleazy con man wearing my dead son's clothes made bile rise in my throat. I watched them toast. Drake raised his glass and shouted something over the music. The microphone picked it up clearly. To the good life, he roared, and to the old man for checking out early. The room erupted in cheers. Vanessa laughed, throwing her head back, exposing her throat like a predator basking in a kill. They weren't mourning. They were celebrating a heist. My phone buzzed on the scarred wooden desk. It was an alert from an automated search bot Mitch had set up. New listing detected, eBay seller Vi Queen 85. I clicked the link. The page loaded. It was a virtual garage sale of my life. Vanessa wasn't just selling the house. She was stripping it to the studs. She was liquidating everything that wasn't nailed down And she was doing it fast. The listings were frantic, poorly spelled, and priced to move. Vintage Fender Stratocaster, $800. Bennett's first guitar. He had mowed lawns for a whole summer to buy that when he was 16. It was worth $5,000 easily. Set of first edition Hemingway books, $200. My collection. 40 years of collecting thrown onto the internet like trash. Men's designer suits, lot of $500. Bennett's wardrobe. The suits he wore to pitch investors. The suit he got married in. She was selling his skin. She was erasing him. I felt a heat rising in my chest, a physical pressure behind my eyes. I wanted to drive there. Restraining order be damned, I wanted to drive my Ford through the front door and burn the whole place down with them inside. But I didn't move. I forced myself to breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Structural integrity, Garrison. Do not crack under load. I looked at the next listing, and my heart stopped. Patek Philippe Calatrava. Rose gold. Engraved. Buy it now, $1,500. I stared at the blurry photo. It was taken on my kitchen counter next to a half-empty wine glass. It was the watch. The watch I had given Bennett the day he launched his company. On the back it was engraved, "To Bennett. Build strong. Love, Dad." It was worth $40,000. She was selling it for $1,500, less than the cost of the champagne she was drinking. I looked back at the camera feed. Vanessa was showing her phone to Drake. She pointed at the screen and laughed. "Look, babe," she said, her voice cutting through the audio feed. "Some idiot already bid on the guitar. We are going to have enough cash for your retainer by midnight. And look at this. The old man's watch. I hated that thing. It was so boring. $1,500. Easy money." Drake kissed her temple. "You are a genius, Van. Liquidate the assets before the lawyers lock it down. Cash is king." She was fencing stolen goods. Technically, until probate closed, those items belonged to the estate, not her. By selling them for cash, she was committing theft and fraud. But she didn't care. She thought she was untouchable. I looked at the listing again. The Buy It Now button was red, pulsing like a heartbeat. I opened a new tab on the browser. I logged into a PayPal account Mitch had set up for me, linked to the line of credit I had secured against my patents. The account name was Anonymous Buyer 77. I didn't hesitate. I clicked Buy It Now. Transaction complete. I went back to the listings. The guitar. Click. Buy It Now. The books. Click. The suits. Click. I worked with the precision of a surgeon. I didn't browse. I didn't haggle. I bought everything. Every single item she listed I bought within seconds. Vintage tool set. My tools. The ones I used to build the treehouse for Leo. Bought. Oil painting. Landscape. My wife's favorite. Bought. Box of old vinyl records. Bennett's music. Bought. I spent $25,000 in 10 minutes. I watched the camera feed. Vanessa's phone started pinging. Notification after notification. She stopped laughing. She looked at her phone. Her eyes went wide. "Drake, look at this," she shouted over the music. What Drake asked, leaning in. "Everything sold," she said, her voice breathless with greed. "Everything. The watch, the guitar, the junk from the attic. It is all gone. One buyer." "Who?" Drake asked. "Some guy named Anonymous Buyer," she said. "Who cares? The money is already in the PayPal account. Transfer it. Transfer it now before he changes his mind." She tapped furiously on her screen, transferring my money into her account. She looked up at Drake, her face flushed with victory. "We are rich," she screamed. "We have cash, babe. Real cash." She grabbed his face and kissed him. Then she climbed onto the coffee table in her gold dress and raised her glass. "Listen up, everyone," she yelled to the room full of parasites. "Drinks are on me. We just cleared out the trash and got paid for it. To the future." The room cheered. I sat in the dark motel room watching them celebrate. I watched her high-five strangers with the hand that wore my son's wedding ring. I watched Drake light a cigar with $100 bill, probably metaphorically speaking, but the arrogance was the same. They thought they had won the lottery. They didn't realize they had just sold their freedom for $25,000. I printed every receipt. I printed the transaction logs showing the money going from my account to hers. I printed the screenshots of the listings. This wasn't just proof of theft. It was proof of intent. She wasn't a grieving widow holding on to keepsakes. She was a looter stripping the corpse before it was even cold. I stacked the papers neatly in my briefcase next to the will and the deed. The anger was gone now. The heat in my chest had cooled into something solid, something unbreakable. I felt a strange calm wash over me. It was the calm of a demolition expert who has wired the charges and checked the circuits and is now just waiting for the countdown to reach 0. I looked at the time. 11:00 p.m. The reading of the will was in 13 hours, noon, Friday. I stood up and walked to the small closet. I pulled out the suit I had bought that afternoon. It was a charcoal gray wool suit tailored to fit. It cost $2,000. I had bought a crisp white shirt, a silk tie in deep burgundy, and a pair of black Oxfords that I had spent an hour shining until they looked like glass. I wasn't going to look like a derelict tomorrow. I wasn't going to look like the broken old man they saw in court. I was going to look like Garrison Ford, CEO, engineer, father. I took a shower scrubbing the jail scent off my skin. I shaved carefully, watching my face in the mirror. The lines were deep etched by 70 years of gravity and grief, but the eyes were clear. They were Bennett's eyes. I went back to the desk and opened the laptop one last time. The party was winding down. The music had stopped. The strangers were leaving, stumbling out the front door, clutching bottles of wine they had stolen. Vanessa and Drake were alone in the living room. The mess was incredible. Stains on the carpet, broken glass on the hearth. Drake was lying on the sofa, my sofa, with his feet up on the coffee table. Vanessa was sitting on the floor counting cash from a stack she must have gotten from selling something locally earlier in the day. "We did it," Van Drake said, blowing smoke at the ceiling. "We actually pulled it off, and the old man is gone. The house is ours. The money is flowing." Vanessa smiled, counting bills. "He was so pathetic in court," she said. "Did you see him shaking? He looked like he was going to die right there. I almost felt bad for him. Almost." She laughed softly. "Tomorrow we go to the lawyer," she said. "We sign the papers. We get the title. And then we list this place. I want to be in Miami by next month. I am done with winters. I am done with this gloomy house. I am done with the ghost of Bennett Ford." She stood up and walked over to the fireplace. There was a framed photo on the mantel. It was a picture of Bennett holding Leo when he was a baby. I was in the background, smiling. Vanessa picked it up. She looked at it for a second. Then she tossed it into the fireplace. It landed face down in the ash. She dusted her hands off. "Clean slate," she said. I watched her walk up the stairs with Drake. I watched them turn off the lights. The house went dark. I reached out and touched the screen right where the photo lay in the ashes. "Sleep well, Vanessa," I whispered. "Enjoy your victory lap. Because when the sun comes up, you are going to find out that you didn't just burn a bridge. You are standing on it. And I am the one holding the detonator." I closed the laptop. I turned off the light in room 104. I lay down on the lumpy mattress, my hands folded over my chest. For the first time in 4 days, I fell asleep instantly. I had a busy day tomorrow. I had a will to read. And I had a family to bury. The elevator ride to the 45th floor of the Stratford Tower was a silent ascent into the stratosphere of wealth. The doors opened with a soft chime revealing a lobby of polished marble and glass that offered a panoramic view of the Chicago skyline under the gray midday sky. I walked past the receptionist, who wrinkled her nose slightly as I approached. I didn't blame her. I had decided against the new charcoal suit at the last minute. Lawrence had texted me a final instruction while I was shaving. Wear the wreckage, Garrison. Let them see the ruin. The resurrection will be more painful for them, if they think you are already dead. So I wore my old stained raincoat over a frayed sweater and slacks that hung loose on my frame. I looked like exactly what they wanted me to be, a defeated old man living out of a suitcase. I pushed open the double mahogany doors to the main conference room. It was a cavernous space dominated by a 20-foot table made of black walnut. The air conditioning was set to a temperature that felt designed to preserve cryogenic tissue. At the head of the table sat Lawrence, impeccable in pinstripes, his face a mask of professional neutrality. But his eyes flickered to me as I entered, and I saw the spark of anticipation. The rest of the room was occupied by the vultures. On the left side of the table sat Vanessa. She was wearing a pristine white pantsuit that looked sharp enough to cut glass. It was a bold choice for a grieving widow, but Vanessa had stopped grieving the moment the dirt hit the casket. Next to her was Drake leaning back in the leather chair, with the ease of a man who had already spent the inheritance. He was wearing a gold watch that caught the light. I recognized it immediately. It was my retirement gift to myself from 10 years ago. One of the items I had bought back on eBay last night. He must have taken it from the pile before she shipped it. He was wearing my watch on his wrist while he waited to steal my house. Next to them sat an older couple. I recognized them from the wedding photos I wasn't invited to be in. Howard and Beverly, Vanessa's parents. They were small people with pinched faces dressed in expensive clothes that didn't quite hide their hunger. They looked at me with open contempt, their eyes scanning my muddy shoes and my unshaven face. "You are late, Garrison," Vanessa said without turning her head. She was checking her reflection in the screen of her phone. "We have been waiting 5 minutes." "Traffic was bad," I said, my voice raspy. "I took the bus." A ripple of laughter went through the group. Drake snorted, covering his mouth with his hand. Howard shook his head, muttering something about poor planning. "Just sit down, old man," Drake said, pointing to a chair in the corner away from the table. "The adults are talking." I didn't argue. I shuffled to the chair he pointed at. It was a simple wooden chair set against the wall, clearly placed there for me. It was a power move. They were at the table. I was in the gallery. I sat down, placing my battered hat on my knees. I hunched my shoulders, making myself look smaller. Lawrence cleared his throat. The sound was like a gavel striking. "We are all here," he said, his voice devoid of warmth. "Let us proceed. We are here to read the last will and testament of Bennett Ford." Vanessa sighed loudly. She tapped her manicured nails on the table. "Lawrence, can we speed this up, please? I have an appointment at the designer district in an hour. We are looking at tiles for the kitchen remodel. The current ones are just so depressing. She was remodeling my house before the deed was even in her name. The arrogance was breathtaking. And frankly, she continued casting a side glance at me. Having him here is making me uncomfortable. He smells like mildew and desperation. Can't we just give him his check and send him on his way?" "Mom, please hush," Drake whispered, but he was grinning. "Let the man do his job. We want everything legal." "Right," Vanessa said, rolling her eyes. "Legal. Just read the part where I get everything, Lawrence. We know the drill. Bennett and I discussed this 1,000 times. Everything to me." Lawrence opened the leather folder in front of him. He adjusted his glasses slowly, deliberately. He was enjoying this. "The law requires that all interested parties be present," Mrs. Ford Lawrence said. "And since Mr. Ford is the father of the deceased, he has a right to hear the disposition of the estate." Whatever Vanessa said, waving a hand dismissively. Just get on with it. She reached into her purse, an oversized designer bag that probably cost more than my first car. She pulled out a checkbook. She scribbled something, quickly ripped out the check, and slid it across the long black table. It skidded to a halt in front of Lawrence. "Give that to him," she said, pointing at me without looking. Lawrence picked up the check. He looked at it. One eyebrow raised a fraction of an inch. $100, Lawrence read aloud. "For gas," she said. "Or the bus. Or whatever he uses to get back to that hole in the wall he is staying in. Consider it a tip, Garrison. For not making a scene today." Her mother, Beverly, chuckled. "That is very generous of you, sweetie. You always were too kind to strays." I stood up slowly. My knees cracked. I walked over to the table. I reached out with a trembling hand and took the check from Lawrence. I looked at it. $100. Signed with a flourish. Vanessa Ford. "Thank you, Vanessa," I said, my voice cracking. "This will help." She looked at me then. Her eyes were cold, dead things. "Don't spend it all on booze, Garrison. And do not think this means we are friends. Once you walk out that door, you are a ghost to us. Do you understand?" "I understand," I said, tucking the check into my pocket. "Good," she said, turning back to Lawrence. "Now read the damn will. I have shopping to do. I promised Drake a new car to celebrate our fresh start." Drake squeezed her hand. "You are too good to me, babe." I went back to my wooden chair in the corner. I sat down. I watched them. They were wolves feasting on a carcass they hadn't even finished killing. They were so sure of themselves. They were so confident that the world worked the way they wanted it to work. Lawrence looked at me. I gave him a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was time. Lawrence cleared his throat again. He picked up the heavy cream-colored document. He didn't look at Vanessa. He looked straight ahead. "I will begin," Lawrence said. "I, Bennett Ford, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament, revoking all prior wills and codicils." Finally, Vanessa whispered. "Article 1," Lawrence read, "regarding the disposition of my primary assets." The room went silent. The air conditioning hummed. I watched Vanessa's face. I watched the greedy anticipation in her eyes. I watched Drake lean forward, his eyes on the document. I wanted to remember this moment. I wanted to remember the exact second before their world shattered. Because the view from the bottom of the canyon is terrible, but the view from the top right before you push the plunger is spectacular. To my beloved wife, Vanessa Ford, I leave the entirety of my estate, including but not limited to the real property located at 42 Willow Creek Drive, the entirety of my investment portfolio held at Vanguard, and my majority shares in Ford Tech Solutions. Lawrence read the words with a monotone gravity that filled the room. He paused to turn the page, the paper rustling loud in the silent office. "I further designate Vanessa Ford as the sole beneficiary of my life insurance policy in the amount of $5 million. I leave her these assets with my deepest love and the hope that she will continue to build the life we dreamed of together." The silence that followed lasted exactly 1 second. Then it shattered. "Yes," Vanessa screamed, jumping up from her chair. She threw her hands in the air like she had just crossed a finish line. "Yes, yes, yes. I knew it. I knew he wouldn't change it." She grabbed Drake by the lapels of his jacket and pulled him into a kiss right there in front of the lawyer, in front of her parents, and in front of the father of the man who had just left her everything. It was obscene. It was a victory lap on a grave. Drake laughed, a deep, throaty sound of pure greed. "5 million, baby," he said, grinning. "We are golden. We are absolutely golden." Howard and Beverly were clapping. Actually, clapping. "Good for you, sweetheart," Beverly cooed. You deserve every penny. You put up with so much. You earned this. I sat in my wooden chair in the corner, clutching my battered hat. I forced my shoulders to slump. I forced my mouth to tremble. I had to sell this. I had to make them believe the demolition was over so they wouldn't hear the explosives ticking beneath their feet. Lawrence sat perfectly still. He waited for the celebration to die down. He looked at me over the rim of his glasses. His expression was unreadable to them, but to me, it was a signal. Hold the line, Garrison. Vanessa turned away from Drake. Her face was flushed with adrenaline and triumph. She looked at me. Her eyes narrowed. She walked around the long table, her heels clicking a staccato rhythm on the floor. She stopped 2 feet away from me. She loomed over me, savoring her height, savoring her power. Did you hear that, old man? She asked, her voice dripping with venom. Did you hear what your son thought of you? I looked up at her, blinking rapidly. Bennett loved me. I whispered, my voice cracking. Bennett pitied you, she corrected. He left everything to me. Every brick, every dollar, every share. He didn't even leave you a token. He didn't leave you a watch or a book or a kind word. He forgot you, Garrison, just like the rest of the world is going to do. She reached out and tapped the breast pocket of my frayed sweater where I had put the $100 check. That check I gave you, she said, smiling cruelly. That is the only money you will ever see from the Ford name again. Frame it, spend it on whiskey, burn it, I don't care. But do not ever come to my door asking for a handout. Drake walked up behind her, putting a hand on her shoulder. He looked at me with a smirk. He checked the time on my watch, the watch he stole. Time to go, babe, he said. We have a celebration lunch booked, champagne and caviar. Vanessa didn't look away from me. She wanted to twist the knife one last time. I told you, Garrison, she said, leaning down so her face was inches from mine. I told you that you wouldn't get a cent. I promised you that I would leave you with nothing. And unlike your son, I keep my promises. Enjoy the nursing home. I hope the bedbugs don't bite too hard. But if you get hungry, just remember what I said. Cat food is cheap, and protein is protein. She laughed again. It was the sound of a woman who believed she was untouchable. She turned her back on me, dismissing me as if I were already dead. Okay, Lawrence, she said, waving a hand at him. Wrap it up. Give me the papers to sign for the title transfer. I want to get the house listed by Monday. And cut the check for the insurance. I have debts to pay. She held out her hand, expecting a pen. She expected surrender. She expected the world to bow down because she had won. Lawrence didn't move. He didn't hand her a pen. He didn't close the folder. He sat there, his hands folded on top of the document he had just read. He looked at Vanessa, then at Drake, then at her parents. Finally, his gaze landed on me. I slowly straightened my spine. I stopped trembling. I placed my hat on the floor. I stood up. My knees didn't crack this time. I stood to my full height of 6'2". I brushed a speck of lint off my old sweater. The air in the room changed. It grew heavy. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Vanessa frowned, looking at me. Sit down, Garrison, she snapped. We aren't done. You are right, I said, my voice no longer raspy, no longer weak. It was the voice I used to command construction crews on suspension bridges in high winds. We aren't done. Lawrence cleared his throat. The sound was like a thunderclap in the sudden silence. Mrs. Ford Lawrence said, his voice calm and deadly. Please take your seat. I don't want to sit, Vanessa said, irritated. I want the papers. Sit down, Lawrence ordered. The authority in his voice made her flinch. She looked at him confused, then slowly sank back into her chair. The document I just read was indeed the last will and testament of Bennett Ford, dated 5 years ago, Lawrence said. However, the law requires that I read the entire file. And there is one more item left. Vanessa rolled her eyes. What is it? A letter. A poem. Just read it and let us go. It is not a poem, Lawrence said. He reached into his briefcase. He pulled out the thick envelope sealed with red wax. He placed it on the table. The sound of the heavy paper hitting the wood echoed in the room. This, Lawrence said, placing his hand on the seal, is a codicil, a legal amendment to the will. It was drafted in this office and signed by Bennett Ford 3 days before his death. It supersedes all previous documents. The color drained from Vanessa's face. She looked at the red wax seal like it was a psalm. 3 days, she whispered. Drake sat up straighter. His arrogance flickered. What does it say? He demanded. Lawrence broke the seal. The crack of the wax was the loudest sound I had ever heard. He unfolded the document. He adjusted his glasses. He looked at Vanessa. And then he began to read. I, Bennett Ford, being of sound mind and acting under no duress, hereby execute this first codicil to my last will and testament. Lawrence read the words with a precision that cut through the air like a diamond saw. I hereby revoke, annul, and cancel any and all bequests, devises, and appointments made to my wife, Vanessa Ford. Vanessa gasped a sound like a tire blowing out on the highway. Her hands flew to her mouth. Drake froze, his arrogant smirk withering into a look of confusion. I take this action. Lawrence continued, his voice rising slightly to override the sudden murmur from Vanessa's parents due to the discovery of irrefutable evidence regarding her infidelity and the fraudulent misrepresentation of the paternity of the minor child, Leo. Liar! Vanessa shrieked, jumping to her feet. Her chair tipped over backward, crashing onto the floor. That is a lie. That is a forgery. Bennett would never write that. You wrote that, Lawrence. You and that old man cooked this up. Lawrence didn't even look up. He simply turned the document around and pushed it across the table. That is Bennett's signature, Vanessa, Lawrence said calmly. And that is the seal of a notary public who witnessed the signing in this very room 72 hours before his death. And attached is the DNA report Bennett brought with him, the one he found in your email. Vanessa stared at the signature. Her face went from flush to a ghostly white. She grabbed the edge of the table, her knuckles turning yellow. He knew, she whispered. He knew, Lawrence confirmed. And because of your actions, he exercised his right to disinherit you completely. You get nothing, Vanessa. No insurance, no stocks, no cash. The $5 million policy. It had a morality clause regarding spousal fraud. It is void. Drake stood up so fast, his knees hit the table, shaking the heavy walnut slab. Void, he shouted. What do you mean, void? We have debts. We have commitments. That sounds like a personal problem, Mr. Thorne, Lawrence said, dismissing him with a glance. But I am not finished. There is the matter of the real estate. Vanessa looked up, her eyes wild. The house, she stammered. The house is in my name. I signed the quitclaim. Bennett signed it. You can't take the house. Lawrence smiled. It was the smile of a shark who just tasted blood in the water. You are correct, Mrs. Ford. Bennett did sign a quitclaim deed transferring the structure located at 42 Willow Creek Drive to you. You own the bricks, the wood, and the glass. See, Vanessa yelled, pointing a shaking finger at me. See, I still have the house. I will sell it. It is worth $1.5 million. I will sell it and leave you rotting in the gutter garrison. However, Lawrence interrupted, his voice cutting her off like a guillotine blade. You seem to have overlooked a fundamental detail of property law. You own the structure, yes, but you do not own the land it sits on. Vanessa blinked. What? 10 years ago, when Bennett started his company, his father provided the capital, Lawrence explained. To protect that investment, we separated the title. Bennett Ford owned the improvements. But the land, the acre of prime real estate in Naperville, was placed in a 99-year ground lease. Vanessa looked around the room confused. What does that mean? It means, Lawrence said, leaning forward, that the land belongs to the original investor, and the terms of the ground lease state that in the event of Bennett Ford's death or the dissolution of his marriage, the lease terminates immediately. He pointed a finger at me. The land belongs to Garrison Ford, and as the landowner, Mr. Ford has the right to demand the removal of any trespassing structures within 30 days. Removal, Vanessa whispered. You have 30 days to move your house off his land, Mrs. Ford Lawrence said. If you fail to do so, the structure is considered abandoned property and ownership reverts to the landowner. I stood up. I walked over to the table. I looked down at Vanessa. She was trembling so hard her teeth were chattering. You have a house, Vanessa, I said, my voice steady and cold. But you have nowhere to put it. You have 30 days to pick it up and carry it away. Or you can leave. Right now. She looked at me. Her eyes rolled back in her head. She didn't make a sound. She just folded. Her knees gave out, and she collapsed, hitting the expensive carpet with a heavy thud. She was out cold. Fainted from the sheer shock of losing $10 million in 10 minutes. Her mother Beverly screamed and dropped to her knees beside her, fanning her face. Howard was shouting for water. Drake looked at Vanessa's unconscious body. He looked at the will on the table. He looked at me. He did the math. The money was gone. The house was gone. The insurance was gone. And he was standing in a room with a lawyer and a man he had tormented. He made a decision. I gotta go, he muttered, backing away toward the door. I don't know anything about this. This is family business. I'm out. He turned and bolted for the double mahogany doors. He hit them hard, pushing them open, expecting to run into the hallway and down to the elevator and away from his debts. But the hallway wasn't empty. Standing there, filling the frame of the door, were 3 men. 2 were uniformed police officers. The third was a detective in a cheap suit holding a pair of handcuffs. Going somewhere, Mr. Thorne, the detective asked. Drake skidded to a halt, his eyes darting around like a trapped rat. I didn't do anything, he stammered. I was just leaving. We have a warrant for your arrest, the detective said, stepping into the room. Fraud, embezzlement, and we have some questions about a 911 call that was made 25 minutes too late. Drake's face went gray. How he whispered. I walked up behind him. Because I watched you, I said. I watched you eat an apple in my kitchen while you talked about spending my son's money. And I watched the security footage from the night he died. Drake spun around to face me. Security footage, he choked out. There are cameras in the house, Drake, I said. There have always been cameras. The officers grabbed him. They spun him around and slammed him against the wall. The sound of the cuffs clicking shut was the sweetest music I had ever heard. Vanessa began to stir on the floor. She groaned, blinking her eyes open. She looked up and saw Drake in handcuffs. She saw the police. She saw me standing over her, not a broken old man, but a titan of industry who had just brought the roof down on her head. Get up, Vanessa, I said. The police have a matching pair of bracelets for you. She started to cry. Not the fake tears from the funeral. Real, terrified tears. Garrison, please, she sobbed, reaching for my pant leg. We are family. I was scared. I didn't mean for him to die. Please don't let them take me. I took a step back, moving my leg out of her reach. Family protects each other. Vanessa, I said. You watched my son die to protect your bank account. You are not family. You are a structural failure. And I just condemned the building. The detective walked over and pulled her to her feet. She was wailing now, screaming for her mother, screaming for a lawyer, screaming for mercy. I turned to Lawrence. Is it done? I asked. It is done, Lawrence said, closing the file. The house is yours. The company is yours. and Leo's trust is secure. I nodded. I looked at the chaotic scene one last time. The crying, the shouting, the handcuffs. It was a mess. But it was a necessary mess. It was the debris of a controlled demolition. "Let's go," I said to Lawrence. "I have a house to clean out, and I have a grandson to find." We walked out of the office, leaving the vultures to the police. I didn't look back. I had a lot of work to do. But for the first time since Bennett died, I felt light. The weight was gone. The foundation was clear. It was time to rebuild. The smelling salts hit Vanessa like a physical slap, snapping her head back and forcing a ragged gasp into her lungs. She blinked rapidly, her eyes darting around the conference room, trying to anchor herself in a reality that had just dissolved beneath her feet. She saw the empty chair where Drake had been sitting before the police dragged him out. She saw Lawrence stacking papers with the finality of a mortician closing a casket. And she saw me. I was standing over her, my arms crossed, my expression carved from granite. I wasn't the father-in-law she had mocked. I was the landlord she had defrauded. Vanessa scrambled to her knees, ignoring the expensive silk of her pantsuit, tearing on the metal leg of the table. She reached out her hands, trembling violently, trying to grab the hem of my trousers. "Garrison, please," she choked out, her voice a wet, desperate rasp. "You can't let them take me. I am scared. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Drake made me do it. He confused me." I took a step back, putting distance between my fabric and her touch. "He made you wait 25 minutes, asked my voice low and devoid of temperature. "He made you check your Instagram while my son suffocated on his own tongue." Vanessa flinched as if I had struck her. Tears streamed down her face, ruining the perfect makeup she had applied to celebrate her victory. "We are family," she wailed, using the one card she thought still held value. "I am the mother of your grandson. You can't destroy your family, Garrison." Bennett wouldn't want this. That was the mistake. She invoked his name. I leaned down until my face was inches from hers. I wanted her to see the eyes of the man she had killed reflected in mine. "My family died on that landing, Vanessa," I whispered. "My family died the moment you stepped over his body to get a glass of water. You are not family. You are a trespasser. You are a squatter in a life you didn't earn." I straightened up and looked at the detective who was waiting by the door, holding the handcuffs. "Officer," I said, "before you book her, I want her off my property. The lease is terminated. I want her things out of my house. Now." The detective nodded. "We can do a supervised escort, Mr. Ford. She needs to collect personal effects before processing anyway." I looked at Vanessa. "Get up," I commanded. "You have 1 hour, 60 minutes to clear your trash out of my son's sanctuary." And Vanessa listened to me closely. "You take only what you came with. If you touch a single item bought with Bennett's money, if you try to pack one bag that my son paid for, I will have the officers add grand larceny to the charge sheet. Do you understand?" She nodded mutely, dragging herself to her feet. She looked small. The arrogance that had filled the room 10 minutes ago had evaporated, leaving behind a hollow, terrified shell. The ride to Naperville was a funeral procession in reverse. I drove my Ford following the police cruiser that held Vanessa in the back seat, caged like an animal. When we pulled into the driveway, the neighborhood was watching. The flashing lights drew them out from behind their curtains. They stood on their manicured lawns watching the queen of the cul-de-sac return in a cage. I got out and stood by the front door. I unlocked it with my key, the master key I had cut 10 years ago. I pushed the door open. "Start the clock," I said, checking my watch. Vanessa stumbled inside, followed closely by a female officer. She ran to the stairs, hyperventilating. I followed her. I wasn't going to let her out of my sight. She went straight to the master bedroom. She pulled a Louis Vuitton suitcase from the closet and started frantically throwing designer dresses into it. "Stop!" I barked. She froze, holding a red Valentino gown. "Check the receipt," I said. Who paid for that dress, Vanessa? She stared at me, her hands shaking. Bennett bought it for me. For our anniversary. Then it stays, I said. That is estate property. Put it back. She dropped the dress on the floor. She grabbed a cashmere sweater. Bennett's card, I said. Drop it. She grabbed a pair of diamond earrings from the vanity. I bought those back last night, I reminded her. Those are mine. Drop them. She screamed a sound of pure frustration and rage. She swept her arm across the vanity, sending perfume bottles and jewelry crashing to the floor. What can I take? She shrieked. What do I have left? I pointed to the corner of the closet where a small, dusty box sat. It contained the clothes she had worn when she moved in 10 years ago. Cheap jeans, polyester tops, the uniform of the girl she was before she sunk her claws into my son. You take what you earned, Vanessa, I said, which is nothing. She fell to her knees amidst the scattered jewelry, sobbing uncontrollably. The officer stepped forward. Ma'am, you have 40 minutes. I suggest you pack essentials. Vanessa crawled to the dusty box. She pulled out a pair of worn leggings and a faded t-shirt. She stripped off her white pantsuit right there in the middle of the room. She put on the old clothes. It was a transformation in reverse. The socialite melted away, revealing the grifter underneath. She packed a small duffel bag with toiletries and the few rags she could claim. She walked out of the bedroom. She passed the nursery where Leo used to sleep. She stopped. Her hand hovered over the doorknob. Don't I warned? You don't get to say goodbye to a room you emptied. You sent him away so you could throw a party, remember? She lowered her hand. She walked down the stairs. The officer was right behind her. In the foyer, she stopped. She looked around the house. She looked at the high ceilings, the crown molding the life she had killed to keep. It isn't fair, she whispered. It was almost mine. Almost doesn't count in engineering, Vanessa, I said, opening the front door. A bridge either stands or it falls. You built yours on sand. She walked out into the daylight. The neighbors fell silent as she passed. She kept her head down, clutching her pathetic bag to her chest. The officer guided her into the back of the squad car. I stood on the porch, the place where she had kicked me out 3 days ago. The rain had stopped. The sun was breaking through the clouds. I watched the police car pull away, carrying the debris of my son's bad luck. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel joy. I felt the deep exhaustion of a man who has just finished a demolition job. The structure was down. The site was cleared. But the work wasn't done. I went back inside and closed the door. The silence in the house was heavy, but it was clean. It was no longer filled with lies. I walked to the kitchen. There was a magnet on the fridge, a drawing Leo had made of me and him fishing. It was the only thing in the house that felt real. I took it down and put it in my pocket. I had 1 hour to rest. Then I had the hardest job of all. I had to go find a boy who didn't know he was an orphan and tell him that his grandfather was coming to take him home. Not to this house. This house was a crime scene. But home to a place where biology didn't matter as much as the truth. I sat on the stool in the kitchen and dialed the number for Child Protective Services. My hand wasn't shaking anymore. I was ready to build something new. But this time, I was going to use reinforced steel. The envelope sitting on Lawrence's mahogany desk was thin, lighter than a feather, but it held the weight of a collapsing star. I stared at it for a long time. The seal was broken. Inside was the final piece of the puzzle, the confirmation of the betrayal that had rotted my family from the inside out. Lawrence didn't say a word. He just pushed the paper toward me, his face a mask of sorrow. I picked it up. My hands were steady now, hardened by the last 3 days of warfare. I read the conclusion at the bottom of the page. Probability of paternity for Drake Thorne %. I closed my eyes. For 10 years, I had looked into Leo's face and thought I saw my son. I thought I saw Bennett's chin, his brow, his smile. But it was a trick of the light. It was a projection of an old man's desperate love. I wasn't looking at Bennett. I was looking at a stranger. I was looking at the biological byproduct of the man who had helped kill my son. The door to the conference room opened and a woman entered. She wore a sensible gray suit and carried a thick file. It was Mrs. Alvarez from Child Protective Services. She looked tired. She sat down opposite me, looking from Lawrence to me. "Mr. Ford." She began, her voice soft but professional. "We have a difficult situation. With Mrs. Ford in custody and no other identified relatives, you are the de facto next of kin. We know there is no biological relation, but you have been the psychological father figure for the child's entire life. We are prepared to grant you emergency kinship placement. You can take Leo home today." I looked at the DNA test in my hand. I thought about the boy waiting in a government office, scared and alone. I thought about fishing trips and bedtime stories. My heart screamed at me to go get him, to save him. But then I thought about Drake. I thought about the way he looked at me in the courtroom. I thought about the poison in that bloodline. If I took Leo, I would see Drake every day, every time the boy got angry, every time he lied, every time he looked at me, I would search for his father in his face. And I would find him. Resentment is a structural rot. It starts microscopic, and it eats the foundation until the whole building comes down. I could not build a life on rot. "No," I said. The word hung in the air, heavy and final. Mrs. Alvarez blinked, surprised. "Excuse me. I will not take custody," I said, my voice flat. "I cannot raise him. But Mr. Ford," she pressed. "He is 10 years old. He is traumatized. He loves you, and I loved him," I replied. "But I am 70 years old. I am a single man, and I just buried my only son. I cannot do this. I cannot raise the son of the man who destroyed my family. I am not that strong. And if I try, I will end up hating the boy for sins he did not commit. He deserves better than a grandfather who looks at him and sees a ghost." Lawrence cleared his throat. "Mr. Ford has made his decision, Mrs. Alvarez. However, he is not abandoning the child to the wolves." I pulled out my checkbook, the same checkbook Vanessa had mocked. I wrote a number, a big number, $500,000. I signed it with a flourish. "This is for the boy," I said, sliding the check to the social worker. "It is an irrevocable educational trust. It pays for his therapy, his schooling, and his college. He gets the principal when he turns 25, provided he has a clean criminal record and a degree." Mrs. Alvarez picked up the check. Her eyes widened. "Mr. Ford, It is penance," I interrupted. "It is the last thing my son would have wanted. Bennett loved that boy. Bennett died thinking that boy was his. I am honoring my son's memory by making sure the kid doesn't starve. But I will not be his guardian. Find him a good home," I continued, standing up. "Find him a family that doesn't know his history. A family that can look at him and just see a boy, not a crime scene. Give him a fresh start. That is something I cannot give him." I walked to the window and looked out at the Chicago skyline. I felt a phantom pain in my chest, a severing of a limb I had thought was part of me. Leo was gone. Bennett was gone. The house was empty. I was alone. But as I looked at the steel and glass structures defying gravity, I realized that sometimes you have to clear the rubble before you can build again. I had saved the boy's future with money, but I had saved my own sanity with distance. It was the hardest decision of my life. It was cruel. It was cold. But it was necessary. I turned back to the room. "Do not let Vanessa or Drake near that money," I warned. "That trust is locked tighter than a bank vault. If they try to touch it, Lawrence will bury them." I walked out of the office, leaving the check and the DNA test on the table. I didn't look back. I had a fishing trip to plan, and for the first time in a long time I was going to fish alone. I sold the house in Naperville 3 weeks later. I didn't list it. I didn't stage it. I sold it to a developer who wanted the land for a subdivision. He asked me if I wanted to keep the chandelier or the custom mantle over the fireplace. I told him he could burn it all. I wanted the structure gone. I wanted the ground cleared. Watching the bulldozer tear through the front porch where Vanessa had kicked me out felt like watching a tumor being excised. It was violent, and it was messy, but it was the only way to heal. The proceeds from the sale, along with the money I recovered from liquidating the assets Vanessa had tried to steal, didn't go into my bank account. I didn't want a dime of it. It felt tainted heavy with the memory of betrayal. Instead, I walked into the dean's office at the state university Bennett had attended. I placed a cashier's check on his desk. It was enough to fund full rides for 20 students. We called it the Bennett Ford Engineering Scholarship. It was for kids who grew up in garages fixing cars with their dads. Kids who knew the value of building something with their hands. Kids who would build the future my son was denied. 6 months later, the air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and deep water. I sat on a weathered wooden dock extending out into a quiet lake in Wisconsin. Mitch was beside me in his wheelchair, his fishing line casting a thin shadow on the water. We hadn't spoken in an hour. We didn't need to. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was the comfortable silence of two old soldiers who had survived the war and were simply grateful to feel the sun on their faces. My phone buzzed against the wooden slats of the dock. It was a jarring modern sound in the ancient quiet of the woods. I ignored it for a moment, watching a dragonfly hover over the water. But it buzzed again, insistent. I picked it up. It was a notification from the bank. The sale of Ford Tech Solutions, Bennett's company, had finally closed. The board of directors had bought me out. Wire transfer received $5,000. I stared at the screen. $5 million. It was a number that would have made Vanessa kill again. It was a number that Drake would have sold his soul for. To them, it was freedom. To them, it was power. To me, it was just pixels. It was just a number. It couldn't buy back the years I missed. It couldn't buy back the sound of Bennett's laugh. It couldn't turn a stranger's child into my grandson. It was the price of a life, and it felt woefully inadequate. Mitch looked over at me. He saw the screen. He saw the number. He didn't whistle. He didn't congratulate me. He just nodded slowly, understanding the hollow weight of that fortune. "You done with that?" Mitch asked, nodding at the phone. I looked at the device. It was the tether that had connected me to the lawyers, the police, the courts, the pain. It was the tool I had used to destroy my family, to save myself. But the demolition was over. The site was cleared. "Yeah," I said. "I am done." I stood up. My knees didn't ache today. The mountain air was good for them. I walked to the edge of the dock. I weighed the phone in my hand. It felt heavy like a brick. I pulled my arm back and threw it. It arced high into the air, spinning end over end, catching the sunlight one last time. It hit the water 50 feet out with a satisfying splash. It sank immediately, plunging into the cold, dark depths of the lake, taking the bank alerts, the emails, and the memories of Vanessa's screaming face with it. The ripples spread out, widening until they disappeared into the calm surface of the lake. I sat back down and picked up my fishing rod. The line was tight. There was something on the hook, a fighter. I reeled it in, feeling the resistance, feeling the life on the other end of the line. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with clean air. I was alone, but I wasn't lonely. I was 70 years old. I had $5 million in a bank account I would probably never touch. And I had a fish on the line. For the first time in a long time, the foundation held. I was solid. I was standing. And I was at peace, and I learned that they mistook my silence for weakness and my kindness for senility. That was their fatal structural flaw. You cannot build a future on a foundation of lies. because gravity and truth always win eventually. True wealth isn't the $5 million sitting in a bank account I'll never touch. It is the peace of knowing I protected my son's legacy when he couldn't do it himself. Sometimes you have to be willing to burn the bridge to stop the enemy from crossing, because standing alone in the ashes of the truth is infinitely better than living in a castle built on deceit. If you believe justice was served today, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about standing your ground. Let me know in the comments. Would you have kept the $5 million, or did I do the right thing by giving it away?